King wasn't a Christian, and he wasn't a patriot, and he wasn't a meritocrat. He wasn't somebody who believed in merit. King's advisors, who wrote all of his speeches, who wrote his books, who basically fabricated this man that we know as Dr. Martin Luther King, many of whom were communists, who didn't believe one word in the Constitution or the Bible, but they knew how to use rhetoric to move crowds. The Civil Rights Movement, it was a way to usurp states' rights, to usurp state sovereignty, and to vest it into the coffers of the federal government. They wanted to expand federal authority. And the second iteration of the Civil Rights Movement would have been in the 1930s under FDR. It was called the National Negro Congress. And the National Negro Congress was started with the help of Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union.
Right.
So you had the communists and you had the feds who had an interest in this civil rights movement. And the figurehead of it was a man by the name of A. Philip Randolph, who was an avowed socialist. The National Negro Congress was like the 1930s version of the civil rights movement. And then it would morph into the civil rights movement under the leadership of Martin Luther King by the 1960s. So again, it was started by the feds and by the communists, the civil rights movement. And it was never organic. It was never grassroots. It was never noble. It was basically meant to exploit grievances, some real, some fabricated, in order to usurp states' rights and to centralize power into the federal government. That's what it was always meant to do.
You look at what happened after the civil rights movement, and you have the expansion of the welfare state. And this was what we're told was a defining moment as to, okay, we're on the right trajectory now. There's still a lot of work to be done, but this social justice movement at least put us in the right direction. But then it was when I started reading Thomas Sowell that you start looking at the economic numbers, and you see that from the 1920s to 1960s, the poverty rate within Black Americans was 80%. By 1960, it had dropped to 29%. But then in the decades preceding the social justice movement, the poverty rates pretty much stayed the same. There was no movement. And then even from the 1920s to the 60s, things like homeownership within Black Americans was increasing. But then again, it just teeters off after this social justice movement. So it's really interesting that we have this kind of cultural narrative that is completely backwards to the economic reality.